Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. When I thought about this sequel coming out, and this is 10 years after the first film, when the first film came out, I was really excited for it. I watched a lot of SpongeBob then. And in the 10 years since then, I don't really watch it as much. And I thought, well, is it that I've changed? Has my taste changed? Is it that the show's on too much? Is it that maybe it wasn't as good? I have rewatched a couple of the early seasons, and I like those. When I look at this movie, I think about how this is really the ugly side of corporate animation. When you have an idea that's a great idea, but you make far too many episodes and overextend its run far past what really it should be, you get to this area where The Simpsons have been in since like season 13, and that SpongeBob is definitely in, where you have just crossed your expiration date to such a degree that there's just like no going back to what made you special in the first place. Plankton trying to steal the Krabby Patty recipe once again in a very elaborate battle sequence until it magically disappears, and a pirate played by Antonio Banderas opens his own Krabby Patty food truck in a pirate ship and steals the recipe and starts selling it to humans, and Bikini Bottom falls into anarchy. SpongeBob and Plankton try to get it back using time travel, which doesn't really work out, but then decide to follow the Krabby Patty smell and go above ground and out of water and try to get the Krabby Patty recipe back from this evil pirate and bring Krabby Patties back to Bikini Bottom. One of the weakest parts of this film is its story. It's interesting that this is the second film, because the way the script's written, it really feels like a first effort. There's parts of this film that could be completely cut out. There's a lot of randomness to it, which both works for it and works against it, and it just felt very haphazard. There's plot points that don't really come up for a very long time. In fact, I thought the trailer did a better job of explaining the story than like the actual movie. You don't really understand about the book, and if you write in the book something happens for a long period in the film, it feels like the film's in limbo until that plot point is really brought up. Really strange the way they do that. It just doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense structurally. It just gives them an excuse to do all this random stuff. I actually like the time travel sequence, and I especially like because that's when this dolphin voiced by Matt Berry, who has a really great voice and I think could work in more animation. He's probably my favorite part of the whole movie. Every scene with him is great, not just because it's his voice, but also because that dolphin character is kind of like the Watcher from Marvel Comics and a dolphin. It's a weird kind of character, and it reminds me of the random strangeness is really what drew me into SpongeBob in the first place and made it so popular. Those are the parts that really got me into the film. The first film was kind of like that, where it just felt like they really combined a bunch of shorter SpongeBob cartoons and mushed them together to make one film, but that seemed to work more towards the randomness, where it worked really well for the film. This, it seems to kind of hold back the movie because you're just so kind of all over the place. You're not exactly sure what's going on. There's these talking pigeons in CG talking to Antonio Banderas that's pretty worthless and not very funny at all. There's bits with the theme song that don't really pay off. There's reoccurring jokes that just don't really work. SpongeBob was a huge show, not just because it was big with kids, but because it was a good show. And the reason it was a good show is because it had good comedic devices, like the one where Patrick and SpongeBob are stuck in that box and you can just hear the sounds of their adventures. Or I remember they did kind of a film noir kind of episode. They did all these kind of really good comedic ideas that made for really compelling, funny kids animation. The first movie I didn't absolutely love. I thought it was like, if the cartoon was a comic book series, that would be kind of the annuals. And this is so much worse than the first film. It's not really in its prime creatively. You know, it kind of reminds me of The Simpsons later seasons, where you can tell they've just run out of gags, but also much like The Simpsons in their more recent years, the whole superhero plotline, you can tell like they did test marketing with little kids and they all loved the Avengers and they thought, hey, let's have SpongeBob be a superhero in this. And that I find incredibly disingenuous and calculating. But also, when you look at newer Simpsons from those seasons, the older Simpsons, their references would be all over the place. You'd have an older movie reference, you'd have a current movie reference, you'd have references abound. If you watch a newer Simpsons, the references are from newer movies. Oh, there's a Breaking Bad reference, a reference to American Hustle, and I've seen all these things, so it's comfortable. It just doesn't feel as challenging. It's like they rejected in the early years talking about what was going on at the time, but then they became so desperate desperate for ideas in later years. They're like, just give it to me. I need it. I need this idea. It's like a junkie looking for a fix. Like they need something to hook people. And this is what they did. They also combined the idea of having cartoon characters brought into the real world, much like the Smurfs or Alvin and the Chipmunks. In fact, the two screenwriters helped write the Alvin and the Chipmunk movies. I don't particularly love that. I don't know why these characters have to look like SpongeBob dolls you buy at Toys R Us when they're in the real world. I like the more bizarre sense, like in the first one where they ride on David Hasselhoff. That's a ridiculous but memorable sequence. And this just felt kind of boring and something I've seen before, but like, let's do it with SpongeBob. The whole thing with the superhero thing made no sense to me because for some reason with Squidward, he was like Sour Note or whatever his dumb superhero name was, and they kept referring to him as that, but everybody else who was transformed into superhero just had their character names. The thing with SpongeBob and the thing with animation, and a lot of this film is actually animated. It's not until towards that latter part of the film that they go into this CG thing. With traditional animation or any animation, specifically with SpongeBob, if you look at what the Fleischer brothers did, or there's this whole theory in animation where anything is possible. I mean, you know, within reason, they still have to draw it, but there is a theory where anything is possible. You throw anything at it and there's like kind of a joy in that. And that time travel sequence has that, where they get kind of surreal, where they get playful, experimental with the dolphin voiced by Matt Berry. When you have sequences like that, SpongeBob comes alive, and this movie really works for it. And I think that random structure lets that happen. That's the joy to it, but it hurts it in such a way because they don't really exactly know how to get on that as much anymore. It's like they're so much more concerned with this film appealing to kids, and before I don't think that was SpongeBob's primary concern when it was at its height. It just feels a little sad, like they just really want to appease these children. The live action sequences were actually directed by Mike Mitchell. That's not on the poster in a lot of places, but Mike Mitchell directed Sky High, and it's very colorful. It's not directed very well, specifically with Antonio Banderas as this pirate. It felt like his performance was kind of weird and wacky and this kind of strange movie star in a kid's movie kind of performance. There are oftentimes I felt like the film didn't know how to cut for his performance. They cut and shot it very awkwardly, like they didn't really know how to get into using Antonio Banderas, which is a shame because I like Antonio Banderas. It's a weird choice. Kind of shows how versatile he is. I was thinking like, when's he gonna work with Almodovar again? The live action sequences really just didn't live up to the 2D animation sequences. They felt a lot less inspired. If you're gonna bring these characters to the real world, which isn't really an interesting concept, why aren't you doing anything with that? Why aren't you bringing more of that sensibility to live action? I thought it was the same director just because the live action stuff was so poorly done, but I think if it had been a director who knew how to use live action, bring that animation sense to live action, it could have really been amazing and awesome and fun and different and unexpected. Look at Phil Lord and Chris Miller, look at Brad Bird. They're directors who brought a sense of animation to live action, and that's just not really brought to the live action sequences. They seem decidedly different. Sure, they're cartoon characters in this world, but except for the thing with the cotton candy, it didn't really get into that as much, unfortunately. This is a show that is past its glory days. This is like listening to a Rolling Stones album in the 80s. Sure, there's a good sequence or something, and it's not a horrible time. If someone's talking about SpongeBob and the best of SpongeBob, I wouldn't even really think about this. I know some of the producers came back, but some of the producers came back to The Simpsons and it didn't save that. And with cartoon shows making movies, most of the time, it's not really that good. The one exception really is the South Park movie, and I think what differed from the South Park movie from all of these other animated shows making movies is the South Park movie put them at a new creative high. It put them in a new place creatively. It was also early in the run and at the exact right time. This one and a lot of the Rugrats sequels and the Simpsons movie, it felt like they waited too long, or the timing's just kind of off. These movies that you're seeing out of habit and for fan service, but they're not movies you're really going to enjoy. But they're not movies that really get into the heights of the show and really show you what that character and what that cartoon could really do. It's sad to see SpongeBob go down this road. There's so many things about this movie that were just desperate, but also badly timed. There's so much creative that just really wasn't overall working for it. Most people around my age and younger grew up watching SpongeBob and loving SpongeBob and laughing at SpongeBob and thinking it was a weird, bizarre show. But this doesn't feel weird and bizarre anymore. The fucking show is just like not what it used to be. And SpongeBob SpongeBob isn't what it used to be, and creatively the show isn't as fun and strange and funny and random in a way that really goes into what makes animation special. It shows you what's annoying and grating about kids movies, and especially corporate cash-in kids movies. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, is just like a sponge out of water. It's all dried up. So if you have seen the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.